Good morning, my friends over on this side, way back in the corner. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. My friends over here, thank you very much for that affirmation. Good morning. Welcome to the second day of the Home Visiting Conference sponsored by the Office of Child Development and Early Learning. For those of you who weren't here yesterday and I have not yet had an opportunity to meet, I'm Deb Dalton. I manage early intervention technical assistance for the Office of Child Development and Early Learning. I want to welcome you here. I want to give you a few details to help you have a successful experience here at the conference. This is our busiest day. We know this is our busiest day. We have the most breakout sessions. We also have the most participants today. We had about 440 yesterday. We're close to 500 today. So we appreciate your patience in finding seats in breakouts and also with the meals today. For those of you who weren't here yesterday, I'm going to pause a minute. This is important for some of the disclosures that we're flipping through, because I neglected to point those out yesterday. This is conference we're offering nursing CEUs for, and we know that nurses here really value those CEUs. In order to assure nursing CEUs, we must put up these disclosures that we are not promoting any medical devices. I'm not promoting any pharmaceuticals. So that we must put up these disclosures. When you get your survey, it's going to ask you if I told you that, I did. Or if I showed you that, I did. So when you get your survey, you know how to answer those first two questions correctly. And we appreciate that feedback. So let me continue with some updates. Yesterday was a fantastic day. We had the Secretary of Human Services here, Teresa Miller, along with the Deputy Secretary of the Office of Child Development, Suzanne Morris, and we had this fabulous mother speaker, Sarah Helkowski, who told a very truly moving story about how home visiting changed her life. And here's a photo of them. Sarah Helkowski, the parent, is on the far left side, my left. Secretary Miller is in the middle, and then there's Deputy Secretary Suzanne Morris there. It was a great presentation yesterday. We are live streaming all of our keynotes, so we did live stream that particular presentation, and we will be archiving it and closed captioning it, so we'll post them later, and you'll get announcements about where that's posted, but it was very moving. Also yesterday, we had the Kiwanis Club give a short presentation about their commitment to early childhood efforts. And the Kiwanis Club has provided the Pennsylvania One book, which is My Cousin Momo, for every participant here. If you didn't get one, they're at the registration table. They actually gave us more books than we need, so around after lunchtime, if you have a use for more of those books, stop by the registration area, and you can have additional copies of that book, Pennsylvania's One book. So a few more conference details. We know that we have participants at 4 different hotels. That was unavoidable because due to many long rainy periods, this hotel was not able to be completely renovated. So a lot of the rooms on the second floor, we could not put any attendees in. So we apologize again today that some people are at different hotels, but it was unavoidable. If you have any concerns about your hotel rooms, please go to the front desk immediately. We appreciate that. As a reference point, all keynotes will be in this room. So you'll start your day out in this room. All meals will be in this room. So today we're providing a lunch for you, and tomorrow we're providing breakfast in this room, and then a grab-and-go snack during break tomorrow. If you requested a special meal for the lunch today, we'll have plated meals for those. And I know we had some vegans, vegetarians, gluten-free requests. It should have your name on it, but you're going to have to ask one of the servers because they're keeping that separate so someone else doesn't pick up your special meal, if you will. So ask a server about that. A couple more reminders. Remember, you have to check in every day and check out every day at the registration desk if you want credit hours. If you're not concerned about credit hours, you don't need to check out every day. That's just to assure that you are here and to validate that you got credit hours. Specifically to the nursing credits, check in with the conference desk because they have forms for you for the nursing credits. You must stay all 3 days to get the official credits, whether it's Act 48, infant toddler, or nursing credits, or PQAS credits. If you just need a certificate saying you are here today to show back to your employer, we will give you some certificates. We have blank certificates out at the registration area if you just need that piece of paper to document your attendance. We're also curious if you guys got all the Eventbrite emails we sent out. Eventbrite is our conference management system, if you will, and that's where we send out all the information about the conference, where we send out your little ticket for the conference attendees. If you don't think you ever got any email for Eventbrite, touch base with Tara or Amber at the registration desk, because we want to make sure that reaches you. For your individualized support, we set up a McV Data Help Desk area. It's in room 3, and it's right near breakout F. It was really underutilized yesterday, and the two guys in there sat alone all day with their data. So if you have any data questions related to McV data reporting, stop by and talk to them, and we'll help you through any problems you have. Or if you just are a data nerd and want to go talk about data with somebody, they're in that room to help you. Yesterday we had some confusion about session numbers and room numbers. The session number might be something like 1D. That's the session number, but it doesn't mean that it's in room D. So please check the agenda to find out what room it's in. Or if you flip over your name tag, you will also see on there where the rooms are. A couple session changes and update. Session 1D, which was compassion fatigue, is replaced by filling your bucket, self-care through the protective factors. It's actually the same sort of theme about self-care as compassion fatigue. So if you were interested in that topic, you can still go to that session, or you may choose another session. Another session, which is 3D, and that was the use of mindfulness, is really, really full. The 1:30 session has about 140 people signed up in it, so it will be tight. If you get a little claustrophobic and don't want to be tight, it's repeated again at 3:30, and there's a lot more room at 3:30. So if you look in the room and think, I don't want to get in this crowd, I don't think I can find a chair, change your session and go to 3:30. As I said, to get your feedback on the conference, we'll send you a short electronic survey at the end of every day. We do appreciate your feedback. And again, the first 2 questions on the survey are about the pharmaceutical disclaimer, which we already told you about. And just quickly, some feedback from yesterday's survey, because people are following directions and answering the survey, and we appreciate it. General comments about the conference were very positive. Some of the specific comments were how I learned how to talk about racial identity as a home visitor and to promote self-esteem and academic achievement. Someone else mentioned, I learned that drug addiction is a lifelong struggle and how to support families to find the resources they need. Someone else said, I learned how my own childhood experience affects how I work with families today. And finally, one person said, I learned the importance of a serve and return as an early communication strategy. Talk, listen, talk, serve, return. So that was a neat comment. And so finally, we know there's a lot of information here today. We have a lot of breakouts. We want you to get a lot of information, but we also want you to relax. You work really hard. You have sometimes stressful jobs. Relax and have some fun here today. Tonight, we are offering Ghost Stories by the Bonfire as a social event sponsored by the Kaplan Early Learning Company. There are still some spaces available to sign up for these ghost stories. There's an 8 o'clock session and a 9:15 session, and you can sign up for those bonfire sessions at the registration area. We do have some chairs there. You may want to bring a blanket or a towel from your room if it's a little wet out. We don't expect rain tonight, but if there is rain, check with the front desk. They have a backup plan. We saw a lot of great networking last night at the reception. It was really a full room. We watched people enjoy talking to each other and just relaxing and networking. So in the spirit of networking, and because we're here about children, I have a very short networking example video to show you. Aren't twins fun? At this point, I would like to introduce Felicia Fisher, who is with the Family Support Program with the Office of Child Development and Early Learning, and she'll be giving you some more details and introducing our speakers this morning.
Yeah, I think I'll just use this. Good morning, good morning, good morning. You know, yesterday we had some fantastic speakers, and I have the pleasure this morning of introducing our keynote speaker, Dr. Judy Cameron. She is a professor of the Department of Psychiatry, University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. Dr. Cameron's research focuses on the effects of everyday life stresses on long-term health. 3 current areas of interest in her laboratory are the effects of genetic factors and early life experiences on anxious and depressive behaviors, identification of factors that lead to stress sensitivity versus stress resilience, and how exercise affects the brain. Dr. Cameron has been a member of the MacArthur Foundation Research Network on Early Experience and Brain Development for the past decade, and a member of the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child for the past 6 years. I would like all of you to put your hands together as we welcome Dr. Cameron to the stage.
Well, it's really a delight to be here. And they told me I could use a mobile microphone so I could stand in front of the podium, which is great because I'm short. And I always am peering up over the podium looking at people. So I am not only from the University of Pittsburgh and a professor, but I have spent actually the last 15 years working on the National Scientific Council for the Developing Child. And you might wonder, what does that council do? Well, the council looks at the science of how life experiences affect brain development, and we try to educate legislators about this. So we write 1-page briefs or 3 or 4-page briefs. You can go to our website and download briefs on all sorts of topics. We make all sorts of movies and videos that are also freely available and can be downloaded if you want to educate people about how important experiences are that children have. But what was really surprising to me, after having been to really almost every state legislature in the country, talking to them about how important life experiences are for kids and how important it is that they vote these into place, I was amazed about 5 years ago when I started spending more time out in the community. And I travel around Pennsylvania. I'm in a lot of communities talking about science outreach for the University of Pittsburgh. And I would ask people, well, and how are your kids doing? And how do you think their brain development is going? And they would look at me like, is she from outer space? What does she mean? How is their brain development going? And I realized that we had been spending a lot of time getting the message about how important experiences are for brain development across to professionals, but we had not got it to the people who matter the most, the people that are actually in contact with children every day, the people who have children, and especially in communities where there aren't a lot of education resources. And so we developed some materials that can be used, and they're being used very widely in home visiting programs in a number of areas in the country. Texas has 550 home visitors now teaching parents about brain development using the Working for Kids materials. So we have a home visitor's toolkit with things I'll show you today that comes in a portable little bag that you can take with you. Today, for a bigger presentation, I'll use something like a poster, a 6-foot poster of the brain. Now, not everybody wants to travel around with a 6-foot poster of the brain, but I like traveling around with it. And for big presentations, these work really well. And so we're trying to educate people using educational tools that are really friendly, that don't require a lot of reading skills, that have hands-on activities and games with them, so that people will want to learn about how they can help their children have sturdy brain development. I should be able to use this clicker. No? There we go. So we're going to get started. I'm going to use a combination of slides and a variety of materials today to talk to you about how important experiences are. So what you're going to find over the course of today is that experiences really build the foundation for lifelong behavioral health and what a child will become, as well as lifelong physical and mental health. And we'll go into a little bit of detail about that, but you're going to become experts on how experiences change brain development, okay? So in this first slide, what I want to point out is the 3 areas that I'm going to cover today. The first is that brain architecture, the actual structure of the brain, changes depending on the experiences that you have. And you might wonder, why would a professor of neuroscience and psychiatry be here talking to you? Well, it's work in our lab that actually showed that depending on experiences you have, you build different brain pathways. And we'll spend a lot of time talking about that. But the child is going to grow up into an adult, and the brain that they have is dependent in a very large part on the experiences they have. The second thing we're going to talk about is that adversity early in life can have really strong, lasting impacts. And you're going to learn about how that happens. But third, we're going to talk about how to make a resilient brain. I mean, we can't get rid of all the stresses in life. We can't even get rid of the major stresses in life. I'm often at legislatures and they say, well, Dr. Cameron, you know, if we could solve the poverty issue, then we wouldn't have so much stress and kids would do better. Have you been working on that? And I'm there, you know, we're going to work on the poverty issue next year. This year, we're going to talk about how to make kids' brains resilient, because kids are going to face stresses. So I think that's a very positive note to end on. So this is a slide of a poster that Working for Kids has. It's just like this, but it has a graph, and it has 2 little boys on the graph. And you see right here a little boy. His name is Dwayne, okay? And what Working for Kids does, it tries to make this information about how experiences affect brain development really accessible to people so that they can really understand it. So you're looking at a graph by Dr. Huttenlocker, who measured thousands and thousands of kids and showed that the rate at which children learn to speak and develop their vocabulary is dependent, or correlated at least, with their mother's level of speech. But rather than saying that to a mom when you're on a home visiting trip, you could talk about Dwayne and his mom. His mom is a hairdresser. So I go to the hairdresser every few months, and I talk nonstop to that hairdresser. I mean, it's mostly because he talks to me. And one day I asked him, I said, well, do you cut other neuroscientists' hair? Is that why you have so much to say? And he's like shaky, he goes, you're such a nerd. Yeah. No, he just likes to talk, and so does Dwayne's mom. She just talks to everybody that comes in. She talks about all sorts of things. She's so excited when Dwayne is born that she starts talking to him, and her friends make fun of her because, he can't answer back. And she goes, "Oh, I know that, but I'm so glad he's here. I'm just going to keep talking to him, and who knows, one of these days he's going to talk back." So Dwayne is exposed to lots and lots of words. Not only does she talk a lot, she has friends over that talk a lot also. And even though we can't see it going on, this is having an effect in Dwayne's brain. The brain area that develops and learns to recognize syllables and words is hearing the words. It actually starts developing before a baby is born, and it's already starting to process words before the baby is born. And so when he starts talking at about 1 year of age, and most children start talking somewhere around 1 year of age, there's variability, he, over the next year, is going to develop quite a large set of vocabulary. He'll have about 600 words in his vocabulary. His next door neighbor here, though, Darren's mom is a dental hygienist. Have you ever had a long conversation with your dental hygienist? No, you're sitting there with your mouth open. No, open wider. You can't have a conversation with your dental hygienist. And she's a quieter person. She loves Darren just as much as Dwayne's mother loves him, but she doesn't talk to him. She figures she'll start talking to him when he starts talking back. But this has an impact, and it means that by the time he's 2, he will have heard many fewer words, and he's expected to have a vocabulary of about 150 words. Now, you might be thinking, no big deal. They're only 2 years old. That Darren can catch right up to where Dwayne is. But we know that these are trajectory lines, and the epidemiological data that's been collected says that doesn't happen. In fact, they both continue to increase their vocabulary, but they stay on those trajectory lines. So Dwayne will always have a larger vocabulary than Darren. Now, what's it like to enter kindergarten if you were a real talker? I was a real talker. I mean, you meet a lot of people, right? That's the child that'll talk to everybody, that'll get people playing games. You also tend to get in trouble a little bit more than everybody else. Yeah, and I can say that for real. I was in first grade when I made my first trip to the principal's office for talking in class. So it's not all good, but you do interact with other people. You tend to be more social. If everybody in the class doesn't like what the teacher is doing, they get you to prod the teacher to kind of beg not to do that activity. What does that teach you? It teaches you how to be assertive and how to not be scared to talk to adults or people of authority. So there are a lot of positive things that come with being talkative. Now, Darren may be very, very good in other activities. Maybe he's excellent in math or excellent in reading, and it's not going to be a disadvantage not to be talkative, but being talkative is an advantage in the society we live in because it allows you to communicate more effectively to people, and that lasts throughout the lifetime. So we talk about that so that we can convince people that experiences really matter. Their brains were the same at the time of birth. They have the same genetic ability to learn to communicate well, but they have different experiences. And the experiences are going to change the outcomes for them, but the reason they do that is because they change brain development. And we're going to learn about how that happens. Now, I also started by saying that it not only affects your behavior, what your experiences are, but it can affect your health. And here you're looking at a slide published by the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences, by the CDC. And I'll show several of these slides in this talk. They're all available at the CDC website if you want to use them. But you're looking at types of adverse stress that children experience and the odds ratio of having a heart attack when you're my age. Now, you would think that my chances of having a heart attack would be dependent on whether my mom or dad had heart problems, maybe whether I exercise or not, or what my diet's like. But what we see here is if in the first 5 years of life you had had 7 or 8 forms of adversity, you have a threefold, a 300% increase in having a heart attack. That's a whopping effect of an experiences that happened before you were 5, and they somehow last with you as you're growing up, so that by the time you get to be my age, they're still affecting the probability of having a heart attack. And you're going to understand, I think, very well why that is. So yes, they really invited a neuroscientist here to talk to you this morning. And this is my favorite slide. When legislators hear that, you can just see them rolling their eyes and kind of groaning, oh. But I think you're going to like this slide as much as I do. So what it's telling you is how the brain develops. And what you see in the left panel is that at the time you're born, your brain has really all the brain cells you're ever going to have. You're not going to get more brain cells, but a baby's head is small and your head is going to grow. What's going on? Well, what goes on is the brain cells develop a lot of connections to other brain cells. So at different points in time, different parts of the brain start developing. And I'm going to use my hands to represent brain cells because I have to hold this. You're going to have to assume that this is a round brain cell. So are you all in that mood for thinking of this as a round brain cell? Okay, here's another round brain cell. So we have hundreds of different parts of our brain. And when it's time for a brain area to develop, the brain cells are genetically programmed to reach out extensions. In neuroscience, we call these dendrites. But when we're talking in public, we just say extensions, and people get it just fine. And what they do is they connect to each other, and they make tons of connections. And you can see that in the middle panel. You're looking at a brain area that is right in the middle of developing at 3 years of age in the middle panel. Lots and lots of connections. But then if we look at that same brain area at 14 years of age, there's fewer connections. But the connections that are left are really sturdy and strong. And so what you should be asking is, what causes some connections to be pruned and other connections to get stronger? And that's where experience matters. The connections that get used a lot during the period of plasticity, when cells are developing, will become strong and permanent, whereas the connections that don't get used a lot have a higher probability of being pruned away. So let's think back to Dwayne and Darren. Remember, Dwayne is talking and talking and talking, forming lots and lots of brain circuits that underlie communication skills. When are those circuits developing? They're developing from the prenatal period till 7 years of age. And so he is going to have a lot of brain circuits that will permanently be available all the way through his life for communication. It means communication will be really easy for him. Darren, on the other hand, will have many fewer connections. He'll be able to talk just fine. He'll be able to learn new words, but talking will always be more work for him. And that's how brain development works for every single thing that you can do. You might not think that you actually learn to show emotion. You might think that just comes naturally. You learn to smile, or you learn to be mad. You might think, oh, you don't learn those things, you just smile or get mad. But that's not true. We learn to do those things. When are emotion and emotion regulation developing? They're developing from the prenatal period till about 5 years of age. Does that mean you can't learn new emotions after 5? No, we all learn new emotions after 5. Maybe we were so lucky that up until 5 we never got jealous. But at some point in our life we're going to be jealous. Or think about romantic love. You won't have had that kind of experience before 5, but you'll have it later. So emotions that you have later are using the circuits that you developed in those emotion areas early in life. So showing emotion and getting experiences, recognizing emotions and showing emotions is really, really important in the first 5 years of life. Now, that's a nice thing to keep in mind because it's a different perspective. We talk to lots of parents and working for kids, and we say, you know, that temper tantrum isn't so bad. They're learning to show their emotions, and that's a good thing. And it makes the parent feel a lot better about having to deal with children that have temper tantrums. There's nothing wrong with that. They're learning to express their emotion. You also want brain circuits to form that will learn to control emotions. But to start with, you at least have to learn to express them. Make sense? Okay. So, we've already said that different parts of the brain develop at different times. Your sensory areas start first, things like hearing, seeing, tasting. Babies can do those pretty well right when they're born. And so those cells start forming connections prenatally. And the pruning process starts right at birth, but it ends really fast. It ends in the first year of life. And this is important. In the United States, all hospitals now are mandated to do a visual screen on children at birth because the period of plasticity in that system is in the first year of life. So let's imagine how that works. Let's say you have a baby born who's cross-eyed. Their right eye just looks this way. It doesn't see that part of the room. If you don't correct that and they go through their first year of life, this eye will have no experience seeing that part of the room. And so all of the circuits in the brain that can interpret that part of the room get pruned away. They're not being used. If the child gets to school and then you correct the muscle, well, the eye will look over there, but the brain won't be able to see that part of the room because it already developed and it pruned away all the unused circuits. So you need to do that corrective surgery in the first year. If you do that, they'll be able to see the whole world perfectly well for the rest of their life. Does that make sense? Yeah. So every other process that you learn works the same way. And what you see is shown in this graph is that sensory abilities make connections. That's the upward swing of this graph prenatally, and then the pruning is in the first year of life. Language starts developing prenatally and ends at about 7 years of age. You know, we could get our school systems to pay better attention to neuroscientists is what I think, because this means that you would be much more effective in learning languages if we taught second languages or third languages in preschool. But no, we teach them in high school. I had 4 years of Spanish in high school. And whenever I'm in South America or Spain, I try speaking Spanish because I'm so proud that I had so much Spanish. And they always ask me, couldn't you speak English? Because they can understand my English better than my Spanish. It's so frustrating. And why is that? Well, I didn't develop customized pathways. I learned after the period of plasticity. So I don't sound like a native speaker. I don't have the accent right. I don't pronounce things like a native Spanish speaker would. Now, lucky for all of us, higher cognitive function, reasoning, planning, decision-making starts developing connections at birth. The period of connection lasts for about 12 years. And then the pruning process lasts a really long time. It lasts till kids are about 25. So I have 3 kids. I have a 28-year-old, a 24-year-old, and a 19-year-old. My 28-year-old went to college at 18, and so she, for 10 years, has been coming home a few times a year. Does she ever remember her house key? No. She's never once, ever remembered her house key. I make a new house key, I give it to her when she's home. She doesn't remember to give it back to me. So somewhere, if she's in graduate school in Colorado, there must be some big pile of house keys to the Pittsburgh house. But she probably doesn't remember where they are. So this Christmas, right as she's walking out the door, she turns to me and she says, Mom, I'll give you back this key in case I ever forget my key again. I'm never ever forget. What are you talking about? And she says, well, and her dad says, oh, this is so nice. She's growing up and becoming responsible. I said, this is really wonderful. Her frontal cortex is finally developed. Right. She just rolls her eyes and leaves. Now, her 24-year-old brother, he isn't even close. We have a long way to go. The 19-year-old doesn't think you need a key to get in the house. She just texts on her phone and says, Mom, I'm home. Can you come let me in? No matter where I am. So there's a lot of development that goes on to age 25, and that's good to remember. So how do we teach about this in the Working for Kids program? Well, what we do, and we'll see how agile I am and can talk into this and put pictures on. We talk about the parts of the brain that develop first. You already know what those are, right? The sensory systems. We talk about parts of the brain that control emotions, and we usually have parents come up and they get to put the pictures on so that they really start to realize that each part of the brain is different and each part of the brain develops at its own time. Here's an area of the brain that controls communication and talking, and an area that controls motor skills. Now remember, this area is developing prenatally through the first year. These areas are developing prenatally until 5 to 7 years of age. But then the frontal cortex, the area that is complex reasoning, planning, decision-making, develops for 25 years. We then have people come up and use a very sophisticated material, yarn, okay, to build brain pathways. And we say, if you want to teach a child to read, what would you do? Well, what circuits do you use with reading? Use your eyes, but you're also using the communication part of the brain. So you need to form connections between the eyes and the communication part of the brain. And then we get them to think about, how are you going to get each individual child to use communication and visual functions so they learn to read really well in the first 5 to 7 years of life. Many people start by saying, well, I'll read to my child. And so we say, okay, you're allowed to make one circuit for reading to your child. Now, what else will you do? Because a child needs to use these circuits again and again and again. They need to use them at least 10,000 times, if not many, many more, to form strong brain circuits. And so they're like, whoa, besides reading, well, I try to get them books they really like. Well, that's a really good idea. They get to make another connection. And then what else would you do? It's getting harder. Well, maybe you'd get them to help you cook in the kitchen and read all the recipes or read ingredients on the can. Or when they're little, just tell you what the pictures are and start becoming familiar with the words. Or while you're driving, have them read words on billboards. You want them to get experience reading over and over again. That oldest daughter who forgets her car keys, one day when she was 5 years old, she had lined up all the stuffed animals she owned in her bedroom on her bed, and she was teaching school. She was a very strict school teacher. I wouldn't want to have her. She was the teddy bear. You need to pay better attention, and so on and so forth. But she was reading to them, and she was teaching them how to read. And everybody that could hear her in the living room thought it was adorable. I thought, oh, this is wonderful. She's strengthening brain pathways. So it's tough growing up with a mom who's a neuroscientist. But we get people to think for their own children. Now, remember I said I had a 24-year-old. He's a boy. He did not like reading when he was little. I would put him on my lap, and he would squirm and wiggle and get down. And I tried to get books about things that he was interested in, but he didn't want to read. And I was really worried about this. And then I came up with a great strategy. I said, oh, that book on dinosaurs, I hate that book. I'm not going to read that book. And he said, oh, you don't like it? He was one of those kids. If I didn't like it, he was going to make sure I had to read it, and I had to read it every single night. Well, it turned out that when he was little, there were a ton of books I didn't like. And he would bring a whole stack of books, but he'd hide those books under the stack. So he was being very clever. I would make faces, I would complain, and he just would think it was hysterically funny, but we would read for hours. So sometimes you have to use individualized ways of getting kids to use their brain circuits, and you're experts on this. You see parents who are having one trouble with getting kids to do one thing or another thing. It takes individualization so that kids will really enjoy engaging in activities and do it over and over again. Another thing that we teach with working for kids is that the brain develops by how much you use it, no matter whether adults want it to develop pathways or not. So think of a child growing up in a household with somebody who has trouble controlling their temper, okay? So this child becomes an expert at recognizing anger. And anger is complex. Sometimes it's loud and mad. Sometimes it can be withdrawn and cold. But both of those are anger. So this child develops really good ability to recognize anger. And most children will get out of the way when they see anger. And if this happens every night or a number of times a week, they will develop very strong brain pathways between these areas of their brain. And they will have those for the rest of their life. So this is good. The brain is always trying to help children. it forms strong brain pathways for the things it thinks they have to do a lot of. However, think about this child when they get to be a teenager, okay? What if they have a Christmas job and they show up late at work and the manager is mad at them? Is the right thing to do run away? No, that's not the right thing to do. You would want that teenager to say, when do you expect me to be here? I won't be late again, and to confront the issue and deal with it. But if you have a child that had a lot of anger in the first 5 years of life, they have really strong brain pathways to run away. So we probably need to understand that better and be able to explain that to them, that, okay, you feel like running away, but you should stay. Now, that is hard to do. And fortunately, your orange brain pathways, which represent the frontal cortex, are developing in the teenage years. And you can have this child learn to recognize that every time they think they see anger, they should not run away. So you're having to have planning skills, reasoning skills. That's the front part of the brain overriding. So front part of the brain is a really good way to develop resilience and to make up for things that happened early in life. This is being built in the first 25 years of life. It can control how you interpret emotions. It can get you to think twice about what you're saying so that you say appropriate things at the appropriate time. The front part of the brain controls what you do so you aren't so impulsive. And it even controls the back part of the brain, how you interpret what you see. So it isn't that what happens in the first few years of life determines the outcome for the rest of your life. It has a really strong influence, but if we worked with teens effectively to increase these brain pathways from the front part of the brain, we could help kids become more resilient and get over some of the problems that developed early in life. But remember, to develop strong brain pathways, it has to be something you do thousands and thousands of times. So if you think teaching a 2-year-old how to control their temper is hard, try teaching a teenager that planning is rewarding, or that decision-making is important, or inhibitory control and not being impulsive is really engaging and a good idea, so that they do it over and over again. So practice your creativity, and with parents, you see, get them to practice their creativity when kids are young, because they're going to need oodles of creativity when their kids get to be teenagers, and they're trying to give them experiences that will give them really sturdy brain development. I'm going to play a short movie now that's just a minute or so that will summarize what we've been talking about.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic blueprint, but experiences shape the process that determines whether a child's brain will provide a strong or weak foundation for all future learning, behavior, and health. During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use. Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more use. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections that are used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later.
Okay, you brain experts now? Yeah, I think you are. And with luck, you can teach this to others too. Okay, so who gets kids to actually do things that we want them to learn over and over and over again? That's adults. That's where the role of adults come in. So from the very beginning, adults hold children, they look at them, they show facial expressions, talk to them. They're introducing them to learning a whole array of things. They show them the world, and if you're lucky, they'll make it so engaging that pretty soon kids will start to show each other things and teach each other, so that by the time they get to school, they can do very well and interact. Good teachers, as we well know, are those that engage kids and get them really well involved.
The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage in serve and return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
So this is a really wonderful thing to teach parents, because sometimes parenting can be overwhelming. There's just so much work to do, and they're trying to cope with their own lives, and they don't feel like the job of raising children is as important as it really is. But if they can be taught that they are actually helping children construct brain pathways, they're helping build their child's brain, they will feel much more important about each other. So, unfortunately, what happens is kids don't have just positive experiences when they're growing up. They have effects of neglect, anger, and abuse, and those build custom brain pathways also, and we've already talked about that. Stresses occur throughout the lifetime, and something to remember is stresses occurring at each time have a specific effect on the brain circuits that's developing at that time. So exact same stress experienced by a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old are going to have different effects, because different parts of their brain are developing. And the part of the brain that's developing is very sensitive to stress before it starts making connections, and after it's done making connections, it's much less affected by stress. So when you think kids have individualized effects of stress, that's right, they do. It's really dependent not only on what their circuitry was like before they experienced the stress, but the timing at which they experienced the stress. Now, we talk about toxic stress, and you probably can name a lot of life stresses that parents that you talk to face. And this slide is just here to show you that stress of maltreatment is a small portion of the stress that kids face. Neglect is a much bigger form. And in every country in the world, even countries that are at war, neglect plays a bigger role in stressing children than facing adversity directly. And you don't want to forget about neglect. Neglect is just as much of a stress as facing adversity. I'm going to go through these quickly. I've already talked about the effects of stress on health outcomes. I'm going to show you this slide. This is work by Seth Pollack, who's a psychologist. He did a study where he took pictures of adults and either with happy or angry faces and then fearful or sad faces. He fed those into his computer, and all the faces in between are computer generated. So this face, for example, was 80% of the pixels from a happy face and 20% from a fearful face. He then brought normally developing children in, and he said, can you tell the difference between angry and fearful? Where does the face change expression? And children and adults are really good at this. And they said right here at the 50% point. But then he brought in children who had grown up facing anger. And they said, no, this face is angry all the way up to here. My goodness. So it's not just that they changed brain pathways, it changes how they see the world. They're super good at detecting anger. And so they see much more anger in the world than adults who didn't grow up with anger. They're really good. They have strong brain pathways at detecting anger. Think about what it would be like if you saw 30% more angry people every day of your life. That wouldn't be so good. You're more likely to have mental health problems. You're more likely to have addiction problems. You're more likely to eat to comfort yourself. You're more likely to have high blood pressure and cardiac problems. There's a lot of outcomes. When we talked at the beginning about the fact that your early experiences build the brain and it has an impact on your health for the rest of your life, you can now see why that's the case. How can we prevent effects of stress and abuse? Well, we used to think that really good parenting, education would build a child up, but that significant adversity would lower the trajectory. But the thinking now is that we need new interventions, interventions that provide a block so that significant adversity doesn't have such an impact. What are those new interventions? Those new interventions are strengthening brain pathways from the frontal cortex. Things like focusing attention, problem solving, planning ahead. All of these things help children be more resilient. All of them are frontal cortex pathways. So you have 25 years to work on this for your children. So how do we address community issues? We're trying to educate the public about brain development. And my hope is that you'll take advantage of many of the tools that we have made and the education that we've put together so that all families in the state of Pennsylvania can learn how to help their children facilitate sturdy brain development. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Cameron, for that wonderful discussion. And if you want to hear more from Dr. Cameron, she will be having a session this afternoon or this morning. So you can learn more about a child developing a sturdy brain. We're going to switch gears a little right now, and I have the pleasure of introducing, we're going to look at things from a father's perspective. And I'd like to introduce Duvall Connor, who has participated in promoting responsible fatherhood programs, to talk about his experiences. Duvall?
Good morning, everybody. First, I would like to thank the OCDEL for having me here and wanting me to come and speak in front of you guys. It's an honor and a privilege. I would also like to thank two gentlemen who had a lot to do with me being here from the Franklin Center, Mr. Sean Owens and Mr. Lisbeth Dowdell. What I'm about to share with you guys, it's not a pretty story. I'm gonna let you know right now. I am a father, single father, of a 4-year-old, 3-year-old, and 2-year-old. Yes. Thought I was finished when I had my 28-year-old and two 22-year-olds. Over 2 years ago, April Fool's Day, crazy. I used to be one of the biggest, I can't wait for April Fool's Day. Everybody's waiting for Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. Me, Easter. April Fool's Day. This April Fool's Day was not a special day for me. I was working 6 days a week, chef, Monday, Saturday, only off day was Sunday. My fiance, she was home with the kids, and I had no idea that she was a drug addict. I was with her for over 4.5 years. She hid it very, very well. She was a great mom, excellent mother. Kids were fed, clean, healthy, house taken care of. Never seen it. April Fool's morning, 10/27, she texted me. She was a little upset about a certain financial situation, but I told her, don't worry about it. We're going to be fine. I have it taken care of. And I called her back and let her know, 10:30, I'll see you when I get home. We'll order something out to eat. Everything will be fine. She says, okay. I didn't know that would be the last time. I didn't know that would be the last time I would ever hear from her. I had a gut feeling about 11 o'clock that something is not right, you need to go home. Any other time, I would take that gut feeling and something would be wrong. But for some reason that day, I said, it's nothing, don't worry about it, everything's fine. And I left work early. And before I could enter the apartment, I heard the kids crying. And at this time, they were just a little bit over 2, a little bit over 1, and barely 3 months old. I had a feeling something was wrong. But I'm hearing them crying and I'm thinking, she's just putting them down for a nap. It's no biggie. I walked into the apartment. The bedroom door was closed. I knew something then was wrong. I walked into the door, the bedroom door, and that's when my life completely flipped upside down. I found my fiance lying dead on top of our 1-year-old son from a heroin drug overdose. So the kids are crying. I'm like, no, this is not happening. I immediately called 911. Everyone comes in. I didn't have the chance to go into, okay, what do I do next? I didn't have that option. Only thing came to my mind was, now I have to be here and do this by myself with my kids. I have to do this for them. There's no worse feeling than trying to put on this face of everything is okay when you know it's not. I've always been there. My kids were always with me. But this was a different thing where I am now the only person who can do this now. I thought that was the worst that could happen. Then we lost our place. I lost my job. I went to a very, very deep, dark depression. I didn't care about anything, anybody. I was barely functioning enough to do anything with my kids. To this very point, to this day, I still haven't grieved the way that I should have. The silver lining came in when Mr. Sean Owens, Mr. Lisbeth Dowdell at the Franklin Center, they got word of the situation. And when I tell you these men jumped in full blast, there was no ands, ifs, or buts about it. They said, we're going to get this man up out of this situation. We have to. He has these 3 babies. If it wasn't for those 2 men and the grace of God, I can promise you, I wouldn't be standing here, and I don't think my kids would be here either. Now, I'm in a better place. I still have my days where I miss her. I miss her a lot. What's funny, earlier, we were looking at the movie, those 2 twins were talking. That reminded me of my kids a couple years ago. They would be sitting there just, blah, 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 blah. And then I found out later on what they were talking about. Woke up about 3 o'clock in the morning. Da, 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 da. They're not upstairs. They're downstairs in the kitchen, making breakfast on my kitchen floor. Eggs, scrambled, milk, cheese in the sink. And I'm sitting here like, why are you down here at 3 o'clock in the morning cooking? I'm saying that because that movie and a few things that was said earlier, I could have got upset, could have yelled, screamed, but they're babies. That could have set a real bad tone for them. My kids have been in early Head Start, I want to say since they were able to get in. I can't remember what age they started, but all 3 of them been to early Head Start every Wednesday. If I could change anything, I don't know if I would, because the situation that I was in with my kids and the mother passing, I thought that was the end of the world for me, because she meant everything to me. But I know they say God gives his strongest warriors the biggest fights. I didn't get it then, I get it now. I wouldn't change anything. This drug addiction thing is beyond, I've never seen anything like this in a long time, since the early 80s. And it can be your child, you not know it, your mother, brother, sister, father. It is killing households. And it's making single parents out of a lot of us. I know she's looking down, and she's proud of what I'm doing. At least I hope she is. But it's going to be extremely hard when it comes to the day that I have to explain to my kids that they have it. They see their mother on the wall, and I let them know mommy is in heaven with God. And they say, mommy in heaven, yeah, mommy in heaven. It's going to tear me apart when I have to explain it to them. I mean, I've come up saying a million times exactly what I would tell them. I don't know if they're going to get it then. Mommy was sick. It's not that mommy didn't love you, she was just sick. We have to change this thing that's going on with our kids, for our kids. Organizations like this, the things that you guys are doing, is huge, and it's a blessing. And I am so proud to be standing here, sharing my story with each and every one of you guys. Like I said, I'm in a very, very good place now, mentally, emotionally, and things are getting better and better every day. I don't want to keep taking up too much of you guys' time, but I want to thank each and every one of you for giving me a chance to tell you guys my story. You guys have a blessing. Thank you.
You know, I want to personally, I do want to thank you on the behalf of all of us for being courageous enough to come up here and share your story, because we work with families every single day, and sometimes we don't always see the rewards, but hearing you share your story gives us a greater encouragement and empowers us and to go out and work even harder. So again, thank you. We're now going to we're going to head to our session, so please consult. Please look at your ticket and your event map and head to your next breakout session. Thank you.